Want to make a podcast? Spotify's got a platform that lets you make one super easily, then distribute it everywhere and earn money, all in one place for free. It's called Spotify for Podcasters, and here's how it works. Spotify for Podcasters lets you record and edit podcasts right from your phone or computer, so no matter what your setup is like, you can start creating today. Then you can distribute your podcast to Spotify and everywhere else podcasts are heard. Video podcasts are also available on Spotify. With Spotify for Podcasters, you can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions. And best of all, it's totally free with no catch. Ever since we discovered Spotify for Podcasters, we have had so much fun trying out all of the features like Q&As and polls that let us be really creative and engage with our audience. I highly recommend you give it a try. Download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to www.spotify.com/podcasters to get started. Harry's memoir has a title and a release date. Meghan speaks out in an interview with Variety. We are in anticipation of The Crown Season 5's premiere in just 1 week's time. Kate has a new patronage, and Camilla's plane encounters trouble on its way home from India. Plus, we've got a great chat with a royal expert where we break down what to expect from Charles' coronation in 6 months' time. All of this and more on episode 74 of Podcast Royal. Welcome back to Podcast Royal. Rachel, how are you this week?
I'm good. I'm actively avoiding the flu that is infiltrating my office and just desperately trying to stay healthy over here. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing good too. We were just talking. I'm trying to stay healthy as well. I'm actually drinking a cup of tea right now as we speak. So it's, we're kind of getting into that season where it's getting dark earlier outside. We're about to have the time change, and it's definitely cooling down. So I think everyone's allergies are kicking in and sinuses are draining.
I know, and the flu is running rampant. So I'm just trying to stay healthy and above board over here.
So before we jump into the Royal Rundown, let's do a quick, what are you into? I feel like we haven't done that in quite a while. And since you always let me go first, I'm going to let you go first this time. So what are you into this week?
Ooh, I am unprepared and going first. What am I into this week? So I guess what I'm into is, I have the extreme privilege and honor of getting some screeners a little early for The Crown, and I am super pumped about that. I didn't know if I was going to get them, and I am, thanks to my work with Marie Claire. And so I'm kind of interested in diving into that, and I don't have them yet. I've been refreshing my email 100 times today waiting for them. They should be coming imminently, but I cannot wait for season 5 of The Crown, and I can't believe that I'm going to get a jump on it. Of course I can't give any spoil. I haven't watched it yet, so I have no spoilers to give, but I'm very excited, as I'm sure many of our listeners are, to dive in headfirst to season 5 of The Crown.
I'm excited that you get to do that, and I'll be watching alongside all of our listeners when it comes out on Netflix. So I can't wait to hear your input, and we'll have to do a little chat about that on the podcast.
We'll definitely do a chat about it, and I'm gonna have to watch it twice because once is for work, and so I'm gonna have to be pausing it every little bit, taking notes, not really fully immersed in it, and then I want to watch it again for fun. And
Right.
So I'm really excited this season is just going to be bombshell, but we'll talk about that a little bit more later on in the show. But what are you into this week?
For me, I am just trying to soak up this fall season leading up to Thanksgiving. I started a little, I don't know, like a gratitude practice, I guess, for this month. I don't know if you saw my Instagram earlier, but I posted about it on there. And, I was just thinking about how we kind of live in this world where we're always wanting, the next best thing, or we're always searching for what we can get, in addition to what we already have. And so my goal this month is to post little things about my house where I live, and I've got a lot of projects going on here. Things that I'm grateful for. So instead of falling into that trap of, wanting the next best thing, what do I have around my house that I can appreciate and enjoy every day? So I plan to post something, a photo or something, and talk about those things. And I kicked that off today. So
Nice.
that's what I'll be doing the next few weeks.
I love that. Gratitude practice is so important year round, but especially this time of year here in the US as we celebrate Thanksgiving. And I want to just say one really quick thing that I am thankful for, and we'll discuss this more in episode 75, our next episode, because it will be right around that time. But on November 14th, that's our 2-year anniversary of this show. And that's I'm really proud of that. I'm really proud of the things we've been able to do on this show in the past 2 years. November 14th, 2020, we huddled up in your walk-in closet on a card table. And it actually, we did episode 1, which is pretty long. It's over an hour. We did episode 1 in one take. We were a one take wonder, but before that, the trailer, which is like 30 seconds. Do you remember this? It took us literally 10, 15 times, maybe more. I can't really remember, to record the trailer. So I think we were sitting there looking at each other going, if it's going to take us 15 or 20 tries to record a 30-second trailer, we're in big trouble. But then we did the first episode in one take, and we usually do all of our episodes in one take. So I think once we said we're going to be an imperfect podcast, so here we are, we kind of let the pressure off ourselves. But 2 years is not an insignificant amount of time, and I'm proud of what we've been able to do in that time.
No, I totally agree. And for our listeners out there who just started listening, please do not go back to the first
Oh,
episode.
yeah, please don't.
We are
Please
far
start
from
with the
perfect
top.
today, but we've come a long way since then. And podcasts is a weird thing. Even if we take a few weeks off, you kind of get out of it and you feel a little bit rusty coming back in, which I kind of feel like that since we've been on this every other week cadence too. But I'm definitely grateful for the 2 years that we've got in the books on this podcast. We've
Mhm.
continued to grow our audience. And oh, and I feel like I need to go back and reference to my photo taking and my gratitude little exercise. So for listeners who don't know, I have my own personal Instagram account where I've had some projects going on at my house, just like DIY stuff that I've been doing. So that's why I was sharing that on that Instagram, in case you were wondering why the heck I was talking about my house on Instagram.
Got it. Well, yeah, this is not on the podcast Royal Instagram, which you also run and do a great job of doing. But yes, much to be thankful for as ever. And so we've got some things to talk about here in the Royal Rundown, most specifically the biggest news of the past 2 weeks, and that's Harry's memoir.
Yes. So let's kick off this episode with that in our royal rundown. This is the big topic everyone's been waiting for. So last week, Prince Harry's book title was announced along with the release date. I know most likely our listeners have already heard this news, but on the very off chance that you missed it, his book is titled Spare. So the cover is a close-up photo of his face in what looks like the warm California sunlight. He's got one of those expressions where you can't really tell what he's thinking. It's not really a smile because his mouth is closed, but it's also not overly serious. I mean, I don't think he looks upset in the picture. But the photo was apparently shot by the same photographer who took Meghan's photo for the Variety interview, which I know we'll talk about shortly. So the book will be available to purchase on January 10th, 2023. Originally, you may recall, it was supposed to be released this fall. It's been pushed back. And, there's been a little speculation as to why. Some think, Harry may have had to go back after the Queen's death and make some edits. I did hear, though, that it's 416 pages long. So it's not a quick read. There's definitely plenty of space there for him to share personal stories that, I think his audience will probably be interested to read. So the book is supposed to be priced at $36 in the US, but you can also purchase the audiobook, which apparently is read by him in his voice. So definitely cool for, the Prince Harry fans if you want to hear directly from him. There are a couple things that I do want to touch on, Rachel. First, I want to know what your thoughts are on the title of the book and what you thought about the cover.
I have been thinking for a long time, months actually, what is Harry going to call this thing? What could he possibly call this thing? And spare never crossed my mind. Although when I saw it, when I read that that was the title, it was just, oh, well, yeah, of course. I mean, it's a very powerful title. It very succinct, obviously, but of course, listeners, I'm sure you understand the context and the reference to this. But spare, of course, is a nod to the heir and the spare, which is the heir is William, his older brother, and Harry is the spare. And that's I find the title very powerful. I find the moniker spare very damaging. I mean, can you imagine? You're the oldest, and I'm an only child, so neither of us are the younger of two siblings. But can you
Mhm.
imagine just being referred to as the spare your whole life? That's really damaging. And
Yeah.
I wrote an article this past weekend about how Diana really tried to shield Harry from that label. But I think it is definitely a clue as to what's to come in the book about how he has felt as a member of the royal family, specifically one that was never going to be king, and how
Mhm.
the institution of the royal family is not really set up to make the spare, if you will, feel good about themselves. And with, I remember when we spoke with Andrew Morton, and he wrote a book about Elizabeth and Margaret. Well, when those two were born, Elizabeth did not know that she would be queen until she was 10 years old. And so for the first 10 years of her life, there was no real heir and spare dynamic between she and Margaret, because they didn't know that their father would be king. And then by the time that there was an heir and spare dynamic, there were difficulties there, but it wasn't from birth. Then with the queen's four children, there were three spares essentially, right? And so there was a little bit more sharing of the spare load. But with William and Harry, of course, both knew from birth that they were the so-called heir and the spare. And there's only one other sibling other than William. So the dichotomy is very, very in your face. And like I said, I think it's going to be a very interesting read, and it's probably really going to focus on how being the second child in the royal family affects someone and their psyche. And as for the photo, were we talking about this where we were like, this looks like a movie poster of like a
Yes.
science fiction film? And he just looks very pensive. I can definitely see the parallels between Megan's photo for Variety and that photo. It's an interesting photo. It's maybe not my favorite of Harry, but it does the job. And I want to add in a couple more tidbits about the book that I don't think we've covered yet. So in this book, you said that Harry's going to read the audiobook. This book was written with a ghostwriter, and that ghostwriter is J.R. Moehringer. I think I'm saying that correctly. He also wrote the biographies of Andre Agassi, who, of course, is a tennis pro, and Nike co founder Phil Knight. And he also wrote his own memoir, The Tender Bar, which was made into a movie with Ben Affleck and George Clooney last year. If any of you have seen that, he's really talented. So I think that the book is in good hands. The book is going to be translated into 16 languages. And I want to throw this tidbit in there. The domain name for the book's website, which is princeharrymemoir.com, was registered on June 21st, which I find interesting, is right about 2 weeks after Harry, Meghan, and the kids returned to California from the UK after the Platinum Jubilee. I just thought that was interesting. So yeah. So and I don't know if spare was already chosen because the website is princeharrymemoir.com. So it doesn't have anything to do with spare, but I think the title is very powerful. I think this book is going to go there, and why I say that is because Penguin Random House paid a pretty penny for this book, and if you're going to pay someone $20 million for the book, which to his credit, Harry is donating most, if not all of that, to charity, but that's a lot of money, and you're going to get your money's worth for that. And I have I have reported on the fact that the edits, so you're right, the book was originally due out in November, but it has been pushed back to early January, which coincidentally, I don't think there's any there with this, but is the day after Kate's 41st birthday, which is on January 9th. But the book was, so they had to go back after the queen passed away and change all the tenses, right? Because she's no longer living. And so they had to go back and edit all the tenses about her, putting her in the past now, unfortunately. And also I've read there is going to be a chapter I've read about the queen's funeral. I don't know if it's a full chapter, but there's going to be something about the queen's funeral. And I've read that they wanted to tone, Harry and Meghan, Harry specifically, wanted to tone down the maybe saucier or juicier bits about Charles, because Charles is now on the throne, which I don't know if anybody expected him to be in November of 2022. But I've also read that, and I've also written about that Penguin Random House actually rejected the first draft of the memoir because it was too touchy feely, it was too soft, and they had JR and Harry go back and make it saucier. So we'll see. I mean, I'm trying to, you and I had this discussion on Sunday. I'm trying to get my hands on an advanced copy of this book, and it's not going well so far, and I'm not sure I'm going to be able to, but I'm going to keep trying. Obviously, I would never be able to talk about it until January 10th. The NDA I would be on would be airtight, but I cannot wait to see how far it goes, how much it pushes. This book is all anybody can talk about right now. It's definitely the most anticipated book of 2023 already.
Yeah, I definitely agree, and I like your takeaways. I think those are super interesting. And I would bet a lot of people haven't heard a lot of what you just shared with us. I definitely agree. We talked about the photo, the cover of the book, and it is giving Hollywood vibes for sure.
Yeah.
I did not know that about the registration of the domain. So that's really, really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I've gone back and forth about the title and what I think will be in the book. Initially, I was like, oh, I didn't really think the title was a great choice because while it on one hand is a great choice, right? If you're trying to draw in your audience, on the other hand, I was hoping the book wouldn't be focused on the negative or the past. And then the more I thought about it, I thought we really don't know what's in the book. I mean, you bring up great points. He was paid a pretty penny for this, so there could be really anything in there. But maybe the title is meant to draw people in, and it'll ultimately have a positive focus, and will leave the reader feeling really good, when they're done with it. So I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. I did want to
Another
share.
tidbit I can tell you really quick before we get into what some of our listeners said, and I'm really excited to, I love hearing from our listeners, is the book is going to open apparently with, of course, probably the most iconic and also at the same time damaging scene of he and William walking behind Diana's coffin, and how damaging that was. I mean, both William and Harry have spoken out in the past about how incredibly damaging that was, and I think that the book will open with that. And I don't know. I mean, if with a title like that, with an opening scene like that, I don't know. We'll see. It might be pretty unflinching, but we'll just have to wait and read.
Yeah, we'll see. So yeah, you mentioned our Instagram account, our followers. So last week we polled our followers to ask their opinions on if they plan to buy the book and what they thought about it, based on the title that was released and the cover. So last time I checked, which was right before the poll closed, 61% said they do plan to read it. 39% said they do not. So, 60/40 is a little more than half. I would say that seems about right to me. I think people have been, I mean, don't get me wrong. I think a lot of people are going to be interested in this book, but when it comes to our royal followers, I think people are pretty split.
That's interesting. That's 61% is a lot lower than I thought it would be. I thought it would be 75-25 or even 80-20.
So, when we asked our followers to share their thoughts on the book cover, one follower said, I'm curious, but I'm also not into him whining about how hard his life is. Another person mentioned the title immediately drags William into it, and I feel bad for William. And then someone else said, brilliant. Can't wait. I think a lot will be about media and how that impacted his family, rather than, you know, just focusing on like the family
Hmm.
dynamic outside of media, which I thought was an interesting
Yeah, that is a
comment
great
as
take
well.
because the family doesn't call him the spare. I seriously doubt anybody inside the royal family refers to them as the heir and the spare. That's a media concoction. So that's a really good point.
Yeah. Yeah, and thank you to our followers for sharing that. We like getting your opinions, and so we'll do some more polls in the future when we have some other stuff going on. So tell us a little bit about Megan and her Variety article.
Yes. So right after episode 73 dropped, Megan was in Variety for her latest interview. Honestly, Megan's pretty media savvy because so the cut article comes out, which we still haven't released that bonus episode. So we'll do that at some point. But we got pretty real and raw and candid about how we felt about that and not incredibly happy with it necessarily. But Megan actually used this interview to talk about the cut interview and how she was perceived in that interview. She also used this interview with Variety to kind of tee up this Netflix docu-series that she and Harry are doing, which actually surprisingly there'd been tons of chatter about it, but had never actually been confirmed by Netflix or the Sussexes until this Variety interview, but now it is confirmed there will be a docu-series about Harry, Meghan, presumably their kids, their life in California. But I'll get to that in a second. I'm getting ahead of myself. But we learned in the interview lots. I'm just going to hit the high points here. If you want to read the full interview, I totally encourage you to. It's a good interview. We learned her favorite romantic comedy is When Harry Met Sally, which is actually my favorite romantic comedy. Do you like When Harry Met Sally? I feel like everybody
I
likes
do
When.
like that movie. It's not my favorite, but I like it.
What's your favorite?
You've Got Mail, of course. The best
Nora
of all.
Ephron for the win, always. Nora Ephron, if you don't know who she is, you should. She wrote both of those movies. Yes, I love You've Got Mail too, but When Harry Met Sally is my favorite movie of all time. Megan, likes to watch Jeopardy. She likes to play Wordle in bed with a glass of wine, also same, actually. Megan spoke about mourning Queen Elizabeth. So this was actually supposed to come out before or right around the time that the queen died, but it was pushed along with the Tonight Show appearance that still hasn't happened and a couple of other media appearances when the queen passed away. But she does address the queen's death. She spoke about mourning her and how to Megan, the queen was a shining example of female leadership. And again, she confirmed that there will be that docu-series from Netflix about she and Harry's life, but she's kind of priming the pump here, which is a classic media training trick. She says that it isn't necessarily the way she and Harry would have told it. So she's smart because it's going to come out and we still don't have a confirmed date. I've heard December, but nothing ever seems firm. It just things come out when they come out with Archewell at this point. Like there's never, you think it's going to come out then and then it isn't, it's delayed, whatever. And so obviously they've seen it. Obviously they disagree with parts of it and how it was told. So this is actually a smart media tactic to get out in front of it and say, hey, this is coming out. It's not how we would have told it. So when there is the inevitable blowback and criticism, which I know nothing about what's in it, but Megan's kind of already primed the pump and kind of already set the stage. So the interviewer point blank said that some saw her interview in the cut as snarky. That is very bold of that interviewer to go there like that, I think. But that actually, as I said, gave Megan the opportunity to address it here in this space. And she also said, and I'm hitting the high points here, that she would support her kids pursuing a career in entertainment, that if any actress was ever going to play her in the future, they could just give her a call. So there's that. And what she talked about, what a typical workday is like for she and Harry as they continue to build Archewell. We've seen, I think, that they share an office, which, look, I can love my husband all day long, but I don't want to share an office with him. That's a little bit too much togetherness. But they literally share a desk. Like we've seen this in pictures before. It's that big desk. But anyway, overall, I found Megan much more likable in the variety interview. And that was probably on purpose after the world's reaction to the cut interview. So I would love your thoughts on the variety interview and on the photos as well, because as we said, we've seen a through line here with the photographer. I thought some of her outfits were beautiful. So I'd love your thoughts.
Yeah, I definitely think that this interview was used to smooth out some of the backlash from the cut interview. I don't think Megan was anticipating the response to the cut interview that it got, and I think she became aware of that. And so I do think that this was, an effort to kind of smooth that over and paint her in a little bit different light. The photos, again, like, yeah, there were some great outfits. I didn't love that cover photo that looked like the one of Harry's cover photo.
Mhm.
I wasn't really a big fan of either of those, of his or hers. But overall, yeah, I mean, this was a much softer interview. Regarding Netflix, I really don't know what to expect out of Netflix. I don't know if they are trying to get ahead of that release because they're worried about things that they chose to put in there that may have negative backlash, or if it really was in fact not told the way they wanted it to be. I mean, we don't really know, and I have really no idea what in the world this show is going to look like or be about. I feel like it will be very interesting to see when it airs. But I have been feeling lately, between the podcasts, the Netflix stuff, the interviews, I don't know if anyone's helping the Sussexes manage their PR, but I've been feeling like we've been getting a little bit of maybe fatigue from overexposure to them and everything that they've got going on. I don't know. I just, I read the articles, but I don't I don't know. They're just sort of, not that I glaze over them, but I just feel like we're getting a lot. And when you start to get a lot, they become a little bit less interesting. They don't pull you in quite as much. So that's kind of where I am on the interviews and all of the media stuff right now with them.
Well, I guess this is what we asked for because we were like, well, where's the Spotify content? Where's the Netflix content? And now here it is. And now, we're like, oh my gosh, it's too much. I personally I'm enjoying it. I mean, I was just listening to Archetypes. We record every Tuesday. I'm sure I've said that a million times. And I was just listening to today's episode of Archetypes before we started recording. And I had one other point to make about the docuseries. Oh yeah. So the book and the docuseries, I think both were heavily basically done before September 8th, before the Queen's passing. I think that in the book and in the docuseries, they were probably quite candid, in particular about Charles, who is now the reigning monarch. And I think there's going to be, I have no confirmation of this. This is just me speculating, but I think that in the speaking of the docu-series in particular, that there will be some things said that maybe they weren't able to get edited out. And that's kind of Megan's way of, hate to keep using this phrase, but like priming the pump, like getting, like preparing to coming out front, basically to say, hey, this isn't how we would have told it. It's like a defense mechanism for what might or might not be said. But again, we'll just have to wait and see. Plus, also with Netflix, we have the Heart of Invictus docu-series, which is specifically about the Invictus game. So we're going to have a lot of, for me, this is like the best Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays present ever. I'm
Well,
like, bring it on, bring it on.
I
I'm
think for
I'm excited.
me, you talked about we've been asking for this for a while, but you have to remember this is like they've waited 2 years, and so it's kinda like you kick something down the road, and now everything's coming out at once. I think it would've maybe gone a little bit, and of course, I'm speaking ahead of it because a lot of it hasn't been released, but seems like maybe it would've been more well-received had it been trickled out over the past
Mm.
couple of years, versus everything all at once. I feel like it's gonna be It's going to be a lot.
It is. And speaking of a lot, and speaking of Netflix, 1 week from today, that the day the episode drops on November 2nd, on November 9th, The Crown drops season 5. And we will surely do some type of special around this. So stay tuned for that. It will cover the turbulent 1990s in the family. So much to unpack there. Everything from Charles and Camilla's affair to Charles and Diana's divorce, Andrew and Fergie's divorce, Diana's death, so on. And the season has been pretty fraught with controversy, especially again, since Harry and Meghan are so involved with Netflix now. And I am not sure this season will do Charles and Camilla any favors in terms of popularity, which is why I think we have seen such a push for Netflix to say the series is more fiction than fact, although I've always found the show to have more fact than fiction, really. I mean, it's not 100% factual, but it's pretty well based in truth. If you've got Robert Lacey as your historical consultant for that show, we've had him on the show. He's amazing. It's pretty true to form. And so I'm just curious, what are you expecting from season 5?
Well, based on the initial comments that we're getting from royal watchers, I agree. I do think people are really torn on this one. I think it has the potential to be somewhat damaging, and I'm a little mixed myself on it. I think The Crown started out as a fun escape to go and watch, and of course it's something that I still will tune into and watch. But I do agree, now that we're getting into more modern times, it's a really sticky situation. And while it may have more fact than fiction, I think those facts may have been, over dramatized, or could have been twisted, or maybe just, I don't know, like, we weren't there, right? So we only know what we watch in The Crown, or what maybe we read in a book or whatever. And I do feel like there should be some sort of disclaimer ahead of these episodes, because while, someone who's a royal watcher, or maybe they live in the UK, they may know the difference between fact versus fiction. But your average American who does not follow the royal family very closely is going to watch this and take it as truth, because there is so much real life facts, or situations that happened, historically in here, but they've just been, taken to the next level, the truth has been twisted a little bit, much for the drama of Netflix. So, I don't know. I start to
I
get a little bit nervous when we're really, really playing with someone's real life that could impact them, and I don't want to do someone harm like that.
I will tell you, the 90s was the truth was stranger than fiction. Some of the things like the Squidgy Gate tapes, the Camilla Gate tapes. I just finished reading Christopher Anderson's new book, The King. We're going to have him on the show in a couple weeks. And I read like parts of the Camilla Gate tapes again. And that's just disturbing. I mean, I'm not even going to attempt to quote that. And I mean, just some of the things that were happening in the 90s, like the Panorama interview, the Jonathan Dimbleby interview. I mean, there was a lot of crazy things that were happening in the royal family in the 90s. And I vaguely remember this because I was following along, albeit as a child. So I didn't, get the full scope of it. But I was definitely invested in the family even back in the 90s. And so it'll be interesting to see what bits of that wild decade in this family they actually choose to run with, because there's so much material there that really did happen. But yes, of course, the show it's still Hollywood, right? It's still dramatized. And there was a debate of whether to put a disclaimer. And honestly, sitting here talking to you, I can't remember I can't remember whatever happened. Some listeners are like screaming at the
I think,
phone.
if I remember correctly, did I hear that maybe they were thinking about,
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't want to say because I can't recall for sure, but I don't know. I mean, it's interesting that the Sussexes have been working so closely with Netflix, and now they've got this drama with The Crown, so
Mhm.
I don't
Well, the
know.
timing is just, I mean, with everything, with The Crown, with the docu-series, with the book. I mean, obviously nobody knew when production started on all of these projects that the Queen would not be on the throne in the late fall, early winter of 2022. And the timing of this is just really poor, like especially Charles and Camilla, who are about to be crowned side by side, roughly to the day 6 months after the show comes out. It's just going to be really bad timing for them. So I want to say that the disclaimer is going to be there, but I'll tell you, we'll know next episode because we'll have seen it. So anyway, well, speaking of King Charles, you've got some updates about
Yeah.
him.
So back to real life royal updates. King Charles has had a very busy start to his reign. He's had a lot of first experiences, including one I was not expecting to happen so fast. Charles recently asked new Prime Minister Rishi Sunak to form a government. So, listeners will remember that just before Queen Elizabeth's death, she welcomed Liz Truss as Prime Minister. And, I think we all kind of saw that as one last work responsibility the Queen wanted to complete before passing the crown to Charles. And I thought that was kind of special that Liz and Charles would, embark on these new journeys together. But unfortunately, after just 45 days in her new role, Truss resigned from her position and Rishi Sunak has taken her place. So, a few fun facts. Charles did meet with Sunak and he accepted his request to form a government. And Sunak is actually the first British Asian prime minister. And looking back at Liz Truss, she is now the prime minister with the shortest time in her role, but she's also the youngest woman to hold this position. So, hopefully we won't see a lot of changes take place like they've done, here recently between Liz stepping down and Sunak taking over. So maybe we'll be in a good place where things will settle down for a little while. But Charles has had a lot of new things he's had to take on in this role.
Yeah, I'm sure he did not expect to be appointing a new prime minister this quickly. And speaking of Charles, speaking of first, we saw him visit Sandringham for the first time as king since our last episode, which we know is a place that meant so much to his mother.
Absolutely. Yeah. And this episode is really becoming a little bit of a Charles highlight. We've got several updates on him, but he recently announced another new title for himself. So in addition as his role as king, he is also now going to serve as Captain General for the Royal Marines. So this role is ceremonial in nature, and it was actually previously held by Prince Harry. So Harry took this role on in 2017 from Prince Philip, but obviously in 2020, when he stepped back as a senior royal, he gave it up, and it's been unassigned until now. It's actually not unusual for the monarch to hold this title. So King George VI was also Captain General for the Royal Marines, as well as George V, which to me seems like it was a really big deal and an honor for Harry to have been granted this role, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, Harry had a lot of honorary military appointments and other patronages that were a huge deal.
Yeah. So Charles said, he feels greatly honored to take on this title. He plans to meet with the Marines in the near future. And he also wished them a happy 358th birthday, which they celebrated on October 28th. So exciting new role for Charles.
Absolutely. And I know it's generating a lot of buzz because he's taking it over for Harry, but like you said, it's been sitting dormant for 5 years, or excuse me, for 3 years, 2 years. What year are we in? I'm calling it 2023 almost for 2 years. So yeah, it's been vacant for almost 3 years. So it's time.
Exactly. Well, shifting on from Charles, I do want to talk about Camilla for a second because I know this story was kind of buzzing last week as well. The Queen Consort recently took a private trip to India where she and some friends stayed at a holistic health center for, I guess it was some kind of wellness retreat that they did. So this center is run by a doctor. It focuses on healing, prevention, and rejuvenation. They offer yoga and other types of wellness activities, and she's apparently been going for years. So Charles has gone with her in the past, but this year it looks like she did a girls' trip. She was there for 10 days, and I'm hoping she got some rest and relaxation because she has definitely had a busy and stressful past few months in her new role. And, Rachel, this makes me think we should do more relaxation and rejuvenation trips.
Yeah, I was just thinking as you were saying that, where was my invitation? I would love to be on that trip. And I agree. Anytime that you want to go on a rest and or relaxation and rejuvenation trip, give me a call. But then, so here comes Camilla rested. On her way home from India, Camilla's plane suffered damage as a result of a bird strike. Actually, there's photos of the plane, and it left the plane with noticeable damage to its nose. And Camilla, God love her, actually has a fear of flying, like a real fear of flying. So this must have been even more terrifying, and even more so to come from being, at a at a wellness retreat in India where you're so relaxed, and then this happens. So thank God everybody's okay. The plane is a little beat up, but everyone's fine. That's so scary. And just again, thank God everyone is okay.
I'm
And
glad that was overall, uneventful. And but way to shake her out of that
well, yeah, no
reality.
kidding, right? Like, way to make the whole however long weeks worth of the rejuvenation trip worth absolutely nothing. It's like, welcome back to reality. But again, just thankful everybody's okay. But we don't mention every little engagement or work that each royal does. If we did, then each episode would be hours and hours in length. But I do want to point out that Kate has a new patronage of note. I think this is so cool. She is supporting Captain Preet Chandi's solo trek across Antarctica in a bid to become the first woman to cross the continent alone and unaided this winter. That I can't think of anything I'd rather not do. I would love to go with Camilla to the wellness retreat in India. I don't think I could handle being with Captain Chandi on this Antarctica voyage. So Chandi serves in the British Army, and she will travel over 1,000 miles on her quest. Last winter, she made history as the first woman of color to reach the South Pole alone and without aid. Why do we have to do these things alone? Like, I mean, I guess that's the record she's trying to break, but that's just like Antarctica for 75 days alone. I don't think I could. I don't think I could. Traveling anyway, last year when she went to the South Pole, she traveled 700 miles over 40 days, and she will begin her journey in Antarctica early this month and aims to finish in 75 days. That's unbelievable. 1,000 miles in 75 days. And even if she were just walking by herself, that would be enough. But get this, she'll be hauling 265 pounds worth of gear on a sleigh. And she's battling, it's also the winter, by the way, which as I say that, I'm like hemispheres, but I'm not going to go too deep into that. Listeners, I hope you're laughing at me. I'm having a laugh attack over here. We had to cut a minute ago because we were laughing. It's just one of those days. But anyway, she's going to be battling against temperatures of negative 68 degrees Fahrenheit and winds up to 60 miles an hour. I mean, no wonder Kate wanted to support this incredible woman.
Yeah.
Bravo. That's
I mean,
amazing.
I think that's so cool that Kate is supporting her and reaching out and wishing her, good luck on this journey. And I totally agree. I will join Camilla on her wellness retreat
Yeah.
any day. While I give mad respect to her for doing this journey, and I think it is so cool, I don't get the desire to want to do that. And to your point, especially alone, like, oh my goodness, it
Yes.
sounds so difficult. And I mean, I know that's the whole point, is
That's the
to
point.
take
Right.
challenges, but man, I just can't imagine, you watch those TV shows where they drop people off in the middle of nowhere. 30 minutes in, I'd be like, all right, I'm ready to go home.
Oh, 30 minutes. I'd be like two minutes. I'm like hauling
Never mind.
265 pounds on a sleigh. No, no. But I mean, again, it's power to her, and I like full support. And this just sounds totally like something Kate would get behind. And speaking of TV shows, wasn't going to throw this in here, but found out today that Mike Tyndall will be appearing on the reality show I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, which is very strange, and it just fascinating. So I think I'll be more prone to watch this next show that I'm about to talk about than I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. But our last royal rundown news item of today is, I've always wanted to visit Althorp, which is the ancestral home of Princess Diana. Princess Diana is also buried on those grounds, but I have not yet done so. But now Countess Karen Spencer, who is the wife of Diana's brother, Earl Charles Spencer, has launched Spencer 1508, which is a behind the scenes look at Althorp. New episodes of the series are released each Friday. I have not caught up with it yet, but I can't wait to. I've seen previews of it, I've seen some snippets. You can catch the show on YouTube. Just type in Spencer 1508. And I'm so grateful to the Countess for offering us this behind the scenes look. And I think I'm much more prone to tune into this than to Mike Tyndall on I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. So will you be checking out Spencer 1508? And while
Well,
we're there, tell me your thoughts on Mike Tyndall.
yeah, I mean, I don't know. I might check out Mike Tyndall and reality TV. That might be a
He's pretty funny. I'll
might
give
give me
him
a
that.
laugh anyway. But yeah, no, this sounds really, really cool and definitely something that I would be interested in tuning into. I love this kind of content. So I'm really glad that you came across that and shared it on the podcast. And listeners, if you catch this, let us know, your thoughts.
Absolutely.
Well, listeners, we are really excited to introduce you to Sarah Gristwood as our guest today, where, among other things, we talk about Charles' coronation, the Queen's legacy, and much more. Take a listen. Today on the show, we're delighted to have with us journalist and author Sarah Gristwood, who is the author of Elizabeth, Queen and Crown, which will be re-released to coincide with her late Majesty's Platinum Jubilee year and ultimately her death last month at age 96. Sarah has written for The Times, The Guardian, and The Telegraph. She's also written fiction and historical biographies like the one we'll discuss today. Sarah, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So, Elizabeth, Queen and Crown was originally released about 5 years ago. So, to put it mildly, much has happened in the past 5 years in the royal family.
Yes.
What was important to you to include in this re release?
Goodness, events just keep on catching up with you, don't they?
Yeah.
I mean, of course, a lot does seem to have happened in that last 5 years. One thing, of course, but hugely important for the Queen herself, I mean, before obviously her own final death, was the death of Prince Philip, her lifelong partner for so many decades. But an awful lot had happened for the monarchy as well. It seemed as if when I wrote the book, first, or when the book was first released in, the first version, really, the monarchy seemed to be in a very good place. It seemed as if the Queen had successfully steered it through, the troubles of the late 20th century, and as if everything had come into calm waters, and that would be her lasting achievement. Well, of course, the last 5 years have done a very great deal, both to question, to throw into some jeopardy the position of the monarchy, but perhaps also to highlight the importance of Queen Elizabeth herself. The events since that time, about 5 years ago, we've seen so much, haven't we? We've seen, obviously, the global pandemic. We've seen here in Britain the scandal of Prince Andrew's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. We've seen first what seemed like the welcoming, freshening, broadening for the monarchy of Prince Harry's marriage to Meghan Markle, and then how that all, from the monarchy's point of view, went wrong. So really an absolutely huge amount has happened.
I want to mention how dazzling the photos were. And I'm curious, do you have a favorite photo from the book you feel captured the essence of Her Late Majesty?
Yes, I think I do. And it's one from some time ago. I'm actually flicking through the book as we speak to find it. But it's the Queen on horseback, outside Balmoral. Actually, I think there's two favourites. I think there's that one informal one, the Queen, you know, with a sort of a heathery Balmoral in the background, on horseback, as she loved to be. She always said, didn't she, that if she didn't have, as a girl, you know, if she didn't have to do what she did, she'd want to be a country woman with lots of horses and dogs.
Yeah.
But the other one, perhaps, is the very famous one of her coronation. It's the Cecil Beaton one of her sitting in full robes against a kind of misty backdrop of, you know, what it actually literally was a backdrop. It wasn't the real Abbey, but of Westminster Abbey. And I think those two kind of reflect the two faces of the Queen, if you like.
That's so fascinating and so true. And the text of the book is obviously brilliant, but the photos are absolutely
Thank you.
compelling and beautiful. And speaking of her coronation, perfect segue, I found the parts of the book about her coronation to be very compelling. Of course, we have just learned that we'll have another coronation in May of next year for King Charles III, which is the first coronation in 70 years. And you write that Queen Elizabeth II's coronation took 16 months of preparation and hosted 8,000 guests. We already know that Charles's will be much smaller than that. I think 25% of that. But the Queen's included heads of state from 73 different countries. So for those that haven't studied it or written about it like you have, tell us a little bit about her coronation.
Oh, well, it was the most extraordinary, you know, amount of pageantry. Because, of course, the coronation at its heart, and I think this was very important to Queen Elizabeth, is a religious ceremony. You know, it was the first time the cameras had been allowed in to witness a coronation, of course. But even then, there was one moment they couldn't see, the anointing of the sovereign with holy oil. And I think this, all the different elements of it, the presentation of the new monarch to their people, you know, they sort of turned to each corner of the Abbey, you know, symbolically, the people who were there accepting them. Things like the oath, but the anointing, which is perhaps, you know, the holiest moment of all, as it were. And I think Queen Elizabeth took that absolutely astonishingly seriously. Not to suggest that King Charles the Third won't as well, but we do know that things will be a little different then. Of course, there was one particular question over Queen Elizabeth's coronation, which we now look back on, which, you know, is different for King Charles, and that was the role of Prince Philip in it. Prince Philip at that time, as we've, you know, heaven knows, we all saw in earlier series of The Crown, and while I hold no brief for The Crown's accuracy, I think that's one thing that wasn't altogether wrong. He was having difficulty adjusting to that very strange, very anomalous position of you know, a reigning queen's consort. And a queen, we already know that Camilla will be crowned alongside Charles, but of course Philip was not crowned alongside alongside Elizabeth. Albert married Victoria after she was already a queen. And apparently at the time, no one really thought that he might be, because after all, if he'd been crowned king, then traditionally a king actually outranks a queen. But that was one quite big thing in a way, that he wasn't crowned. Instead, Philip was the first of the temporal, as opposed to the spiritual, peers to kneel and swear allegiance, to swear to be her liege man of life and limb. And of course, he kept that vow.
All the way to the end.
Absolutely.
You write, over the preceding weeks, the queen, had been wearing the crown while sitting at her desk to get used to its great weight. Prince Charles would recall her going in to say goodnight to him with it balanced on her head. I love anecdotes like that. And I want to ask you, how do you think Charles is preparing for his coronation,
Hmm.
which we know Rachel said will take place in the spring?
Yes, we do. 8 months away, but still, as you said, that's a lot less time than actually not only Elizabeth, but all the coronations of the 20th century. I think took longer to prepare than that. I
Mm-hmm.
think. Well, as you said, it is smaller in some ways, a quarter of the guests, and we wait to see whether quite so many foreign heads of state and so on. After all, they have all just been here for Queen Elizabeth's funeral. And I think in this new coronation, there'll be more of a kind of active attempt to involve different elements of British society. But I think the other thing we've seen in the first weeks of King Charles's reign is that he's not been wasting his time all those years waiting in the wings. It became apparent very quickly with that speech that he made, the day after his mother's death, that address to the nation, that he had been thinking, that he and those around him, thinking very carefully of what kind of uh, a monarchy he wanted his to be. So I guess that there has been, a lot of thinking. A lot of the thinking about this new coronation will have been done already.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of Charles, he was actually there at his mother's coronation. He was 4 years old.
Mm.
There's a great photo in the book of him sitting between the Queen Mother and Princess Margaret. And Princess Anne was the only of the Queen's other children that was alive, but she was only, I believe, not quite two or not
Yes,
quite three. And
she
so
was. Yes, too
she was
young.
not there. So in 1953, as I said, only Charles and Anne were born. Anne was deemed too young to attend, but just any more details you can provide about what you anticipate Charles's coronation being like. We know that it's going to be slimmed down. It's, as you said, it's going to only have a quarter of the guests. I've heard it's also going to be shorter. And
Mhm.
so any other details that you've heard as a royal expert that our
Yeah.
listeners might like to know?
Yeah. Well, as you say, the Queen's coronation, 3 hours. And of course, the congregation had to be in the Abbey many hours before that. I mean, there were stories of, peers actually sort of hiding packets of sandwiches inside their crowns, their coronets. And I believe the Archbishop of Canterbury had a flask of brandy tucked away in his robes in case the Queen herself or any of her maids grew faint with the long proceedings. One of them said that, yes, there was a moment when she actually thought she'd just been on her feet so long she thought she was going to go, but
Mm,
luckily didn't. Um, I think the big question, really, the interesting part is going to be exactly that thing of how King Charles, how he manages to involve the different elements and the different faiths of 21st century British society. Because on the one hand, this is a religious ceremony, it's conducted by the Archbishop, it's one in which the new sovereign proclaims their allegiance to, their determination to protect the Church of England, takes on the role of, secular head of the Church of England. But on the other hand, Charles, as a prince, said that he'd like to be seen as defender of faiths rather than
mhm.
necessarily the old phrase defender of the faith. So although it's in an abbey and a ceremony conducted by an archbishop, I think there will be a very determined effort to make it as inclusive as possible. We don't know the details of exactly how that'll work out.
What was the most compelling anecdote or piece of research you learned from writing this book?
Oh, goodness. I'm trying to think. I think perhaps it is some of the stories of the Queen behind the scenes, as it were. I mean, we all obviously, people who are around royals are very fond of, telling how wonderful they are and, how they have a great sense of humor. But apparently the Queen really did. She was a very good mimic, apparently, and not afraid in private circles of letting that rip. Um, there really are stories of her flashing back quite quickly with a retort if necessary. I mean, as when she was in the States, wasn't it? And the president said that, oh, something like this is the first time mentioned 17, a date in the 18th century when he meant the 20th, and she cracked that she hadn't thought she was that old.
So witty, so witty.
Yeah. So I think it's probably stories like that. But I was personally fascinated by the struggles, and I think that is the right word, of the first years of her reign, of the early 1950s, because of course she acceded to the throne 1952 at age 25, earlier than anyone might have expected, because her father died so young. It might have been expected that she and her husband Prince Philip would have at least another few decades of comparatively private life.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, there they were, thrust onto the world stage. It was particularly hard for Prince Philip, but it really is that kind of thing of her struggling with the huge sense of duty we all know she had, to come to terms with life as effectively the world's #1 career woman, juggling, this world career with being a 1950s wife and mother. And of course, that was a decade when it wasn't really assumed that wives and mothers would necessarily work at all.
That's actually really interesting. And of course, I've logically thought about that, but when you juxtapose that she's one of the most powerful women in the world in the 1950s, in a world where women weren't really so as seen as powerful as they are today,
Yes.
necessarily, that's fascinating.
Mm.
So what you've written about a lot of queens in your career. It's in
Uh-huh.
particular, you write about queens, and I love that. What fascinates you most about Her Late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II in particular as her biographer, and why is she such an interesting subject to you?
Mm. Well, I think in a way it is. I mean, I've always been fascinated by women and power. So
Mhm.
for example, I've written about a lot, I'm fascinated by the first Queen Elizabeth and the second Elizabeth, the Tudor Elizabeth. And Elizabeth II, when she came to the throne, everyone, like Churchill, was saying new Elizabethan age. And she was quite keen to reject those comparisons. But there is a kind of tussle, if you like, in Elizabeth II between the fact that she came to the throne as a very young woman, surrounded by powerful, much older men, people like Winston Churchill, indeed. She was always very anxious, not to kind of put her own views forward, to put duty first, her own feelings second. And yet, 70 years on the throne, meeting more world leaders than any other one human being can have met. the travels, the vast changes her reign has seen. She wound up being not only an icon, but I think a very powerful figure, despite the limitations of constitutional monarchy, and one who I think in the end did own her own power in her own quiet way. She never would step beyond those constitutional bounds. But I don't think you get to have that kind of world reach for 7 decades and not be aware that, you know, you really have something, a unique position on that world stage.
Sarah, what do you hope readers get most of all from this book?
Well, perhaps a slightly more playful sense sometimes of Queen Elizabeth, and perhaps a slightly more personal sense. I mean, she herself, as we've been saying, she never let her own feelings come first. She, you know, sort of preferred, it wasn't natural to her to display her emotions, but nonetheless, behind the scenes, and as you said, if you look at some of the pictures, the photographs, you do get a sense of a woman who, behind that rather impassive mask, had a twinkle in her eye, and whose reign did see such enormous changes, you know, to whatever degree she contributed to them. If you look at the pictures from the beginning, you know, the black and white ones from this very quite secluded little world in which she and Princess Margaret grew up, to the worldwide travels and the much kind of smilier queen of later years, who, while she had to contemplate, you know, some appalling controversies and problems like the global pandemic, nonetheless wasn't afraid to let her smile show at last. So I hope the pictures in the book at least reflect that change, that growth over 7 decades.
Well, as we've said a couple of times, the photos are beautiful. And the words are as well. And the book is great. And our last question for you today, I say this morning, it's this morning in the US, but you are in the UK. It's very much the afternoon. But it may be too soon to fully capture this, as we're only about 6-ish weeks out from her passing. But generations from now, as her biographer, I wonder your opinion of what her late Majesty's legacy will be.
Well, that is a good question, because that does tie in very much to the revisions made, or the extension made to this book, because 5 years ago we would have said that her legacy was to have steered the monarchy into calm waters, you know, and set it flying off the 21st century.
Little did we know.
Little did we know, exactly. But, big but, the events of the last few years, the pandemic, actually made Queen Elizabeth's own role all the more important. That amazing speech she made, addressed to the nation in the early days of lockdown, really talking about reconciling past and future, you know, ending with a quote from Dame Vera Lynn, "The war, we'll meet again," remembering her own wartime broadcast. And that really, if you like, she was speaking to the nation, perhaps to the world, and, you know, obviously wanting to give what they needed, as she always did, but also, in a sense, that was almost laying out the monarchy's table as well, because that, in a sense, is what the institution does do for us. So far, as you say, we're not far at all we're in incredibly short time into the new reign, but so far It looks as if acceptance for King Charles is much warmer and more ready than it looked at one time as if it might have been. And I think it's too early in a way to say what Queen Elizabeth's legacy is, but we can guess what she'd have wanted it to be. That the institution she loved and served would survive well through the 21st century.
Elizabeth, Queen and Crown is out now. So this is a must add to your royal book collection, listeners. Please do check it out. And thank you so much, Sarah, for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for coming on the show, Sarah. I loved learning from her. And I've got to ask you as we close, I'm wondering what you're most looking forward to for the coronation, which is almost to the day, 6 months away.
Yeah, we've talked about this before, but I think it'll just be interesting to see. Well, I mean, obviously, most of us living today didn't get to experience the Queen's coronation as it happened in real time. So this will be a first experience for a lot of us. And I'm really excited about that. I'm also excited to see how it will be different. There's so much that we don't know. And so I'll be really watching and seeing what types of traditional ceremonial elements that they bring back from coronations past and what things they do that are new.
Absolutely. Want to watch before that. We've got 6 months to do it. So want to watch the Queen's and then just see how it juxtaposes with Charles's and what it's going. You know what? I've been noticing this about myself. I would never dream of calling Her late Majesty Elizabeth on this show, but I call Charles Charles all the time.
I've thought about that too.
I need to change that because I'm so used to calling him Charles, just as, I mean, not that Prince isn't worthy of our respect, but he wasn't the monarch. And I would never have dreamt of calling her Elizabeth like so casually. And so I need to kind of get in that mode for the king, excuse me, as well. But yeah, it will be, I thought that conversation with Sarah was incredibly interesting, and there's just a lot to look forward to. The good, the bad, the ugly, or as Mike Tyndall would say, the good, the bad, the rugby. See how I tied that all up with a little bow? Episode 74 in the books. Listeners, don't forget to follow us on Instagram at Podcast Royal. I love the polls that we're doing. I really like hearing from all of you. Email us at hellopodcastroyal@gmail.com and follow, rate, and review our podcast. 5 stars goes a long way. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And thank all of you for tuning into episode 74 of Podcast Royal. We'll be back in 2 weeks. We've got some really good interviews coming up. Cannot wait for our next episode 75 interview. Y'all will love it. Have a great couple of weeks, and we'll catch up with you on the other side of season 5 of The Crown. Bye.
And I know we promised a quick episode this time, but we didn't do it. Bye.